Front and Center. Front and Center. A focus on important and significant developments affecting the lives of Filipinos, not only in the Philippines, but also those living and working around the world. Join us in Front and Center. Front and Center. Here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service.
Welcome to Front and Center, where we focus on developments in the Philippines, legislation that provides policies and directions that strives to promote a better economy for the country, issues that concern the welfare of and well-being of every Filipino. All of these and more will be Front and Center. You can watch this program on our Facebook page and YouTube channel, Radyo Pilipinas World Service. This program can also be heard on the following shortwave frequencies: 12.010 MHz, 15.640 MHz, and 17.820 MHz. Join us for another edition of Front and Center with your host, Jerome Toledo. The Philippines and Japan signed on Monday, July 8th, the Reciprocal Access Agreement, allowing Filipino soldiers to undergo joint combat training with their counterparts in Japan. The joint combat training to be held in Japan aims to further enhance the two nations' defense cooperation. The RAA was signed by Philippine Department of Defense Secretary Gilberto Chidoro Jr. and Japanese Foreign Minister Kamikawa Yoko during the latter's courtesy call with the president who witnessed the signing ceremony. The defense agreement, which will take effect after ratification by the two countries' legislatures, is the first pact forged by Japan in Asia. Prior to the signing of the said agreement, negotiation for RAA have started during the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's visit to the Philippines in November 2023. Also, RAA with Japan was a commitment made at the inaugural Philippines-Japan Foreign and Defense Ministerial Meeting, or 2+2, in April 2022. And to help us analyze the agreement and how would it affect us as a nation, here again is the renowned international studies expert from the De La Salle International Studies, Professor Renato De Castro. Prof. De Castro, welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you very much for giving me a chance to be part of your program.
All right, and it's our pleasure too. Okay, the Philippines has existing military agreements with the United States and Australia through VFA and SOVFA respectively. So, Professor De Castro, how is the RAA different among these agreements with the US and Australia?
Well, it's basically the same. It is what you call technically a status of forces agreement that provides for the two following. Now, number one, of course, we'll be conducting military exercises with Japan. And of course, Filipino forces will also be conducting military exercises with the Japanese homeland and of course in the Philippines. So the agreement basically provides that, when Japanese forces are here or Filipino forces are in Japan, they are there not as an occupation force. They are there because they had been invited by the host country. So in this respect, this is an exercise of sovereignty and, of course, an indication of goodwill on the part of the two countries, that we allow your forces to conduct exercises here or even conduct humanitarian assistance and risk reduction. So they're here as part of a guest, and of course, we provide them what you call certain legal guarantees. But the case with the Philippine-Japan Reciprocal Access Agreement, which makes it different, let's say, from the visiting force agreement we have with the United States, is that if, let's say, hypothetically, a Japanese service personnel allegedly committed a crime here in the Philippines, Philippine law would automatically apply to him. Unlike in the case, let's say, of the Philippine-U.S. Visiting Force Agreement, everything had to be dealt on a bilateral basis. So there's in a way, the Visiting Force Agreement is unique with the United States because it provides for all actions. Even let's say when you have the service personnel, the U.S. Marine, I think Corporal or Private Pemberton was of course convicted of a crime. He had to be put in what we call a holding facility, which of course was managed bilaterally by both the United States and of course the Philippines. Not in the case if we have this Japanese service personnel allegedly committing a crime here. Once, of course, the Japanese would give the Philippine government custody over him, then the Philippine law applies on him. And the same is true if a Filipino serviceman commits a crime in Japan, then automatically he'll be subjected to Japanese law. So this makes the case with the Philippine-Japan reciprocal access agreement equitable compared, of course, to what we have with the United States, the visiting forces agreement.
I see. With that, Professor De Castro, so once a Japanese serviceman has committed crime in the Philippines and a Filipino serviceman committed crime in Japan, so they will face the justice in the host
justice
country.
System of the host country.
Yes.
Well,
and they will be imprisoned there.
Not necessarily. Of course, he'll have to be tried. Both Japan and the Philippines, of course, respect what we call the due process. So they'll, of course, be subjected to the the mechanism of the justice system, the criminal justice system of that country. Just a case in point, though. Of course, there are certain qualification even when you talk about the U.S.-Philippine Visiting Force Agreement. Then, of course, you have the Australian Status of Force Agreement. Both countries will still have to determine whether that crime was, of course, committed at the time they were conducting official mission. In contrast, of course, if the crime had been committed outside of what we call the official function or operation of, let's say, that serviceman. Of course, hypothetical case.
Yeah.
Let's say you have hypothetical example. You have, let's say, a Japanese armored personnel carrier conducting a military exercise with the Philippines, then of course got involved in an accident, causing possibly the death of a Filipino farmer. Both sides would have to determine whether, of course, that crime happened within that period when, of course, that joint military operation is happening. If that is the case, then both sides would have to talk. The Japanese would tell to the Philippines, he committed the crime, but then he'll be subjected to the Japanese court-martial system, the Japanese self-defense force. And basically the Philippines would say, okay, anyway, that incident happened at the time that we're conducting this joint military exercise. It's a totally different situation, let's say, if that Japanese service personnel committed or allegedly committed that crime outside that official function. Let's say he's having a drink in a bar, got involved in a fist fight with Filipinos, then automatically he'll be subjected to Philippine law.
I see.
So that's also the case.
All right. Go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's also the case.
Go ahead.
If you have a Filipino serviceman, let's say in Japan, committed allegedly having involved in an incident while he's conducting an official military operation, then of course he'll be subjected to Philippine. Both sides will have to negotiate. This happened at the time that he's conducting an official operation. Then he'll be subjected to the court-martial proceeding of the armed forces of the Philippines. But of course, if that crime is committed after that official function, then automatically he'll be subjected to the Japanese criminal justice system.
Oh, okay. So it's meaning to say it's a civilian court.
Yeah. No. Of course, civilian court. Yes.
Okay.
The same is true. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I see. All right. As a geopolitical analyst, Professor De Castro, so how do you see the RAA will benefit both Philippines and Japan? Since we just talked about the criminal aspect of the RAA, how do you see the RAA will benefit both Philippines and Japan on another aspect?
It will make the Philippine-Japan security partnership almost on par with the Philippine-Australian security partnership. We don't have an alliance with Japan. We don't have an alliance with Australia. What we have is of course security partnerships where we cooperate in certain aspect of security affairs. In both Australia and Japan, we try to enhance the capabilities of both our armed forces. It's not an alliance. The only alliance we have, of course, is with the United States, where, of course, aside from the fact that we have the Visiting Forces Agreement with the United States, we also have the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty, which is, of course, makes our security relationship with the United States unique because we are allies. In the case of the Philippines and Japan, the Philippines and Australia, we are, of course, security partners. So by signing the Reciprocal Access Agreement with Japan, our security partnership with Japan is now on par with the second most important security relations we have,
I
and that
see.
is, of course, with Australia. So we have a treaty alliance with the United States. We have two security partnerships, very close security partnership: Philippine, Australia, Philippine, Japan. So that's why
Mm-hmm.
Secretary Manalo announced our security relations with Japan is now on a highest level. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, actually, the highest level would be in the case of the United States, because there, of course, we have a treaty, we have a mutual defense treaty. Not yet with Japan, not yet with Australia, but I don't see it happening because anyway, both Australia and Japan are also treaty allies of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So that is, of course, I see
I see.
the relevance of the reciprocal access agreement. We have elevated our security partnership with Japan, quoting Secretary Manalo on the highest level.
On the highest level. Okay. Since this is a security alliance only, so is that related to the Pacific policy of Japan? So that's why we only have a security alliance with Japan, unlike with the United States, which we have a special agreement with them.
Let me just deal with what we call the pacifist constitution of Japan 1947. It's there. Japan is prohibited from having an armed forces. Japan, of course, has should not engage in any offensive war.
Oh yeah.
The constitution, the provisions of the constitution are still there. The Japanese have not touched that article in their 1947 constitution, but the Japanese have already changed the interpretations. So they have reinterpreted their constitution. So in a way, the constitution's, the Japanese interpretation is this: we still want to maintain the peace and stability of the Indo-Pacific region, but we have to take a proactive approach. We have to develop at least their self-defense force, and of course also develop their security partnerships with like-minded countries. And more significantly, also mentioned, Japan will start selling, in fact, has already started selling military equipment. At this point in time, not yet lethal. Japan has already sold to the Philippines a quality radar system, which of course being used right now by the Air Force.
All right. And
So that's
okay.
the case. We cannot simply look at the what called the pacifist clause of the Japanese Constitution in abstract, because the Japanese had made it a point not to change the wordings of the Constitution, but to, in a way, change the interpretations to suit to what they say, what they would say as a changing time, a dangerous period in the Indo-Pacific region. And of course, both the Philippines and Japan are cognizant of the fact that both countries are confronted with China's maritime expansion in the South China Sea and also in the East China Sea.
I see.
So from the Japanese perspective, we have to change our interpretation of our pacifist constitution.
I see. And I will have a separate question regarding the air defense system that you just mentioned a while ago. But how do you see the RAA affects this situation in the Indo-Pacific region? So do you think this will serve as a kind of balancing the power in the region, or would it further escalate the tensions?
Well, of course, if you talk about the escalation, the tension, there is indeed escalation, the tension, but it's not because of the action of the Philippines, action of Japan, actions of, let's say, the United States. The tension is there because of Chinese aggressive and expansionist goal. And we see this in the South China Sea. We see this in the East China Sea. What the Chinese would basically say is that if you react to the tension that they have generated, you're the one causing the tension. But we have to understand, indeed, there's tension. There's no denial the increase of the tension. There's no denial that it might, of course, intensify the tension because it will impress upon the Chinese that we will not take their aggressive action sitting down.
Nice.
But we have to understand, we have to accept the fact that the tension in the region is triggered by China's expansionist ambition. So that's basically my point. I will agree with you. It would increase the tension. But the bottom line is, it's not Japan, it's not the Philippines, it's not the United States, nor the relationships that has triggered the tension. It's Chinese efforts to basically control the waters of the first island chain.
I see. And China.
So that's basically, yes.
Sorry. China right now since we have signed the RAA with Japan. So this time, China will react against this agreement with Japan.
Definitely. Their foreign ministry already came out with a very strong statement reminding Japan of what it did during the Second World War. But this is my take as a Filipino. In the case of Philippines and Japan, we have settled the issue. Japan has basically atoned for what it did
Yeah.
during the Second World War, starting the war. But this is basically my point. My concern is China, because China is acting like Japan in the early 1940s. If Japan was, of course, the expansionist, aggressive power then in the in 1941, in the 21st century, it's China that is basically triggering the tension, and of course triggered by the fact that it has an expansionist ambition, not only, of course, in the waters of the first island chain, but also against Taiwan.
So it's there's a saying of Professor De Castro. So it's like a history repeats itself.
Yeah, but of course you have a different actor right now. Before it was Japan. Now, of course, it's obviously China.
China now. Okay. All right. On another topic of Professor De Castro. So maybe we get your thoughts on the recent passage of a Chinese flotilla led by an aircraft carrier on the Philippine Sea. I think this is a Chinese aircraft carrier strike group. So do you think such kind of passage is a kind of Beijing's indirect response to the signing of the RAA between Manila and Tokyo?
It's direct. And let me explain why it is directed against us.
Yeah,
and this, of course, this came from the reports of the Taiwanese Defense Ministry. So usually, of course, it's not new that the Chinese carrier battle group, either led by the Shandong, which is their most modern carrier, or the other one is the Liaoning, the older carrier. But usually, the Chinese carrier battle group would pass through the narrow straits separating Taiwan and, of course, Batanes, and that is, of course, the Bashi Channel.
Bashi Channel, yeah.
So that has been the pattern. But in this recent passage of the Shandong, it passed through what we call the Balintang Channel. It's the waters separated the different islands of Batanes. So it's within our archipelagic water. Of course, the Chinese would say they have the right of innocent passage. Yeah, that's given, that's accepted. But the fact that it not passed through the Bashi Channel, it passed through the Balintang Channel, is sending a message to us. And of course, it's not only the Shandong that passed through the Balintang Channel. Right now, of course, it's in the Pacific area of the what we call the East Philippine Sea. It's conducting a major naval drill with the Russian Navy. So both actually China and Russia are sending a message to us. But that's a reality we have to face. In a way, since we have elevated our security partnership with Japan, both Moscow and Beijing are looking at us like a security partner with Tokyo, which both countries, of course, considered as their competitor or rival. So that's it. Nothing in the international, nothing in life has no consequences. That's one of the consequences we will have to face, since we have strengthened our security partnership with, of course, Japan.
I see. And I think yesterday, the 66 of Chinese fighter planes or fighter jets has circled Taiwan. Is that correct?
Yes. We're on the same boat.
And that's a lot.
Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines are on the same boat, because all of us are, of course, basically targets of Chinese expansion. And what Chinese military thinkers would say, the islands of the first island chain, the countries of the first island chain: Japan, Taiwan, and of course the Philippines. So from the Chinese perspective, we're all fair games.
I see. Okay. Oh, so it's like flexing muscle to us.
Sending a message to us. Don't go too close to Japan. Don't even sympathize with Taiwan. But we have to do what we have to do. We are not a tributary kingdom of China. We're not a province of China. We have to act as a sovereign, independent country that, of course, have vital interests that, of course, threatened by Chinese expansion into our West Philippine Sea.
I see. Okay. We see, Professor De Castro, that some ASEAN members are watching now how Manila handles the issue of maritime dispute in the West Philippine Sea, particularly with China and with some members of the bloc trying to distance themselves on the issue to avoid denting relations with Beijing. So, do you think such kind of agreements of Manila with its allies will affect the Philippines' position in ASEAN centrality, like
Now we have
creating
to understand,
code of
yeah, we have
conduct?
to understand ASEAN and of course the notion of ASEAN centrality. Number one, when we talk about ASEAN, we're talking about the national interests of 10 ASEAN member states. ASEAN is purely an intergovernmental organization. There's no such thing as a notion of what we might call ASEAN collective consensus or ASEAN collective norms. Rather, ASEAN member states individually interpret ASEAN or their membership in ASEAN is based on their national interests. So some ASEAN member states couldn't care less about what's happening in the South China Sea because they're located in mainland Southeast Asia.
Mm.
So that's their interest to stay away. So we respect that interest the same way as they should respect our interest when it comes to the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea issue. It's a matter of vital national interest. So we have to take what it takes to basically defend our interests the same way as some ASEAN member states couldn't care less about the South China Sea issue because they're a good friend of China and of course they're located in continental Southeast Asia. ASEAN centrality will always be there. ASEAN centrality, of course, is based on the fact that the viable regional organizations in the region, like the ASEAN Regional Forum and the ASEAN Defense Minister Forum and ASEAN itself, are the only existing regional organizations in, of course, this part of the world. So that's, of course, the basis of ASEAN centrality. And our action does not really affect ASEAN centrality. Forming close security partnership with Japan, with Australia, and of course maintaining our alliance with the United States would not lead to the demise of ASEAN. ASEAN will still be there.
Still be there. Okay, so okay. For this one, Professor De Castro, so I would like to get your opinion on some reports that, yeah, you mentioned this earlier, that the Philippines is in talks with Japan to acquire more Japanese-made military assets, like an air defense system. So with
Air
the
defense
signing,
system, yes.
yeah, with the signing of RA, which obviously strengthens the two countries' strategic ties. So do you think this agreement will ease the military deal between them in the future?
Are you sure? Sure. Because, of course, Japan has already indicated a policy of transferring weapons to like-minded countries. The signing and hopefully, of course, the ratification of the Philippine-Japan Reciprocal Access Agreement would make it easier for the Philippines to acquire and for Japan to transfer those weapon systems. Like I heard, the air self-defense force, or I don't know whether it's the air or ground self-defense force, would be decommissioning its Cold War vintage Hawks air defense system. Well, that would be very useful if they transfer it to the Philippine Air Force or the Philippine Army. Either we buy it or probably, of course, it will be given to us for free. Or, sometimes you even have a talk of notion of lease. It will be a great boost to our air defense system. It will still matter, although they're not on par, let's say, with the Patriot missiles that Japan has already acquired from the United States. But it will boost our air defense system to protect Philippine airspace.
Okay, and that's a very good development when it comes to defending our sovereignty, particularly in the West Philippine Sea or in the entire Philippine archipelago.
Yes, yes. And of course, given the fact that we are now implementing what we call a national defense strategy called the archipelagic defense concept, which will, of course, get a shot in the arms by the transfer of weapons from Japan and, of course, from the United States, Australia, and, of course, even from India.
Oh, okay, I see. And in relation to this, Professor De Castro, so I would like to get your opinion as well on the extended deployment of the U.S. mid-range Typhoon missile system in the Philippines. So, amidst going tensions in the disputed West Philippine Sea. So, how do you read this kind of deployment in the Philippines?
Oh, we're sending a message to China. Yeah, you might threaten us with your hypersonic missile, but we have something that could return the favor. It's a good weapon system to basically also as a deterrence against, of course, Chinese actions, and of course also symbol of the level of secure alliance we have with the United States. Of course, the Chinese would say it's causing tension, but go back again. What is the source of the tension? It's Chinese aggressive expansionist policies in the region. That is the source of the tension.
Okay. All right. Finally, Professor De Castro. So, yeah, third State of the Nation President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr. is coming up. I think it's going to be on July 22nd. And as an international studies expert, what are your expectations in his third address to the nation in terms of foreign policy, geopolitical situation of the country, particularly here that we are facing lots of threats in the West Philippine Sea?
Okay. Of course, if you listen to any State of the Nation address of any presidents we had, they focus primarily on the domestic. That is a given because you're talking to the Filipino nation. I'm expecting that at least you'll have more paragraphs allocated when it comes to foreign policy and, of course, national defense. I don't expect it to be really dominated by external policies or national defense. But I expect more paragraphs will be allocated to these issues, to these matters.
Okay. And that would be like to give a strong word to any foreign adversaries to not mess with the country.
I think it's more telling the Filipino people that the situation is totally different right now. For so many decades, we have enjoyed the peace and security of the region, but now everything has changed. And so we have to prepare for any possibilities, for any eventualities in the near future. Basically, we have to strengthen our sense of national cohesion and, of course, more importantly, a sense of national purpose. And that is, of course, to defend what President Marcos emphasized in the Shangri-La Dialogue last May. The Philippines as an archipelagic state and the Filipino nation as an as a maritime nation. I'm sorry.
Okay.
That, of course, threatened by, of course, a country that is bent on maritime expansion.
I see. And all right. And with that, Professor De Castro, thank you so much for giving us analysis and at the same time opinions about issues about the RAA, and at the same time what to expect on President Marcos Jr.'s third State of the Nation address. And thank you so much, Professor Rene De Castro, for joining us in the program.
Thank you very much, and again, thank you very much to our listeners for for giving us their very precious attention.
Okay, thank you. And you just heard De La Salle International Studies expert, Professor Rene De Castro. And that concludes this edition of Front and Center here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service. Together with our producer, Erwin Peñano, and technical personnel, Milo Janela, this is your host, Jerome Toledo. Join us again here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service, Front and Center. Mabuhay and love the Philippines.
You have just heard and watched Front and Center. Front and Center. Join us again for another edition here on Radyo Pilipinas World Service. Front and Center.